Hi, Teresa Nutt here, and I want to take some time to talk about the coaching mindset as it relates to clinical conditions. And the reason I want to do that is I noticed last semester when teaching the course, and not just in clinical conditions but fundamentals as well, is that it can get easy for people to insert their judgments, observations, etc. as fact and not present it in a way that it's really about observation. And so the point of this PowerPoint is to really cover some things to help you get more comfortable stating your observations in a way that A, other professionals understand, and B, really helps you get at how to do it in a way that doesn't make your judgments, assumptions, or biases fact. And then we'll talk a little bit about curiosity, and finally ending with some empathy. So we'll be covering a few different things. And I will talk about, as I talk about how to communicate things, the reporter voice, and I'll explain that more in a minute. And coming from curiosity is important, I would say, as I thought about this PowerPoint, it's not just for the coach and when you're in the coaching session, but it's also for the observer who is watching a session unfold. We don't want you to be judging anything that's happening. We want you to be coming with a curious beginner mindset. There's a distinction and it's important, and we'll talk more about it. And as I mentioned, building your capacity for empathy is really the underpinning of this entire course, and it'll be huge as it relates to this conversation as well. So before we delve into the developing reporter voice conversation, I wanted to talk about 3 traps that a person can fall into, and all of these definitions are from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And the first trap is judgment, where we form an opinion based on something we witness. And the trick is then we usually share that something as believed or asserted, right? So it suddenly becomes a truth somehow, when in fact all that it is an opinion we formed based on something we observed. And so judgment can be a very slippery slope, and I see people making judgments very not intentionally, not meaning quite what they come across saying, and so that's why I wanted to really bring that to your attention. It can be very subtle, and we'll get through some examples. Then there's assumptions, where we assume that something is true, and we kind of take it for granted. And so anytime we're filtering something through our own personal experience, which is what observing is all about, we're at risk for making assumptions because we do this automatically. And so the trick is to not state it as a fact, but to really get in the place where we're stating it as an observation, not an assumption. And the last is a bias. So it's some people, ideas, experiences are better than others. And it's based on what we've lived through in our own life, and so we all have them. So figuring out how to not insert our biases is going to be super important, not only as coaches but as observers. So the way to help you with this, avoiding the 3 traps, is to develop this reporter voice. And you do that by reporting what you are seeing, hearing, and experiencing without judging, without assuming, or without inserting your personal biases. So you want to avoid certain things like saying the coach was grounded, calm, present. How can you know that? You can't know. And so there are other ways you can state that, such as the coach's body language reflected XYZ. But I think sometimes we say the coach was, the client did, the client was, and we can't really know. You can't know by observing what was actually happening. And then avoid saying things like the client was excited, tired, low energy. So again, this is a little different. It's more subtle, but sometimes we want to state what we experienced of their energy, I think is how I would say it. And we say it in such a way that it's our interpretation, and we can't know for sure. But again, body language, vocal inflection, all of these things can help us get at some cues that really communicate what actually happened in the session. And a reminder, avoid interpreting any situation, because you cannot interpret without inserting your perception. So I'm going to say that again, because avoid interpreting any situation because you cannot interpret without inserting your perception. So as a coach, as an observer, we are filtering everything through our own experience, which takes you out of what you're hearing, seeing, etc. And it can move you from seeing things as an observation to seeing things as a fact. And that's where we get into trouble. As a coach, one of the best ways is to reflect back to the client what you're experiencing and then say, so am I seeing that right, or am I hearing that right, or is that what's true for you? But this kind of language that helps you not get settled into a place where what you see and experience becomes somehow a fact. So here are some cues that'll help you get in the right place with these coaching sessions. And really, I want to just say that this will really help you immensely with your documentation. And when you get out into the working world, you will not just be communicating with other coaches, you'll be communicating with other healthcare providers of different kinds. So your ability to capture succinctly in a really useful, unbiased way what happens in a coaching session will be super important. So these kind of phrases will help you get started. Saying things like the client reports, the client states, the client said, helps you really capture what actually happened in the session. Another is to capture the body language, like I've said in different ways. The client's body language was, the inflection was. So capturing some of those cues really helps give some observation mindset around what's happening. You can also use it to capture feelings. So I observed that the client expressed feeling XYZ. And the next one is like, it is something we want you to continue to work on and focus on because it's so important. What are the direct words and phrases that are critical to the session? Maybe it's something the coach said that really shifted the client, or maybe it's words that the client kept bringing up over and over that help the coach really tune into and help make a shift. Whatever it is, whenever we can capture those direct words and phrases, they are so powerful for the client, for the coach, and for other professionals who are working with them in unison. And finally, I would ask that you come from this curious place of, if you're the observer, and even if you're the coach who is reflecting on the session you've just done, it's not about judging what happened. It's about being curious. So there is a different flavor to being curious versus judging what happened. So if you're coaching, you might sit back and say, wow, the energy shifted here and it seemed to slow down a little bit. I wonder if I would have done this differently, how that might have impacted the session. And the same for the observer. It might be, wow, when the coach asked this question, I noticed a pause. So I was curious, was the client just processing, or might a different question have worked better? And if a different question might have worked better, what question might I have considered using? Again, it's just a way of being really open about it, really curious about it, and not getting stuck in judgment. So I want to expand on curiosity a little bit and talk about what you can pay attention to, both as a coach and even I would say as a client, in honesty, because really starting to tune into what lands for you and how you know that will help you tune into it in other clients. So for coach, client, and observer, what seems to really work in the session? Where does the energy really flow? Or at other times, where does it lag? And maybe what's going on? It's like, what's going on when the energy really slows down? Maybe it's okay when the energy slows down. There's not a one-size-fits-all, but being curious about it. What might you have done differently if you could do it again, or if you were the one coaching, if you're the observer? And what new phrases, questions, or ideas can you put into your toolkit after experiencing this session? So as the client and observer, you get the benefit of hearing a coach try things, and you can walk away with things that you might like to try in the future. I want to spend a little time talking about distinctions related to empathy because there are a lot of things that we use to relate to other people that are not necessarily as powerful as empathy. And I want to go through those distinctions because most of them are things we do automatically, and they're just not as powerful in the coaching relationship as empathy, and we're going to get to why that is. So let's start kind of what I consider the bottom of the totem pole, which is pity. It is the thing you never want to do in a coaching relationship, and it's based on feeling sorrow for the misfortune of others. And it puts you and the person you are interacting with at different levels. Woe is me, I feel so sorry for you, you poor thing. And I hope you can hear in my sarcastic inflection that that is how it can come across. So as a coaching client, that cannot feel good to have someone relating to us in that way. Another is sympathy, which is the next rung on the totem pole, and that's really understanding others based on sorrow and pity for their misfortunes. The challenge for this one, and I think sympathy is something we use a lot, especially in our close, intimate relationships. So with our close friends, with our close family members, we have sympathy for what they're going through. The problem or the challenge can be that it can take you out of the present moment as the coach and kind of suck you into the other person's stuff. And I call that the energy soup. It's like you can get sucked into the other person's energy soup. And so that's why I feel like sympathy is not as helpful as a way to relate in the coaching relationship. Then there's compassion. Again, such an important way to relate to people. But notice the wording. It's a feeling of wanting to help someone in need. And we talked a lot in Fundamentals 1 and 2 about the righting reflex. Compassion has a way of triggering the righting reflex because we want to help. And it can take us away from seeing the person as already whole and complete. So all of this leads up to the pinnacle where we want you to develop your mindset and approach things is from this place of empathy. And it's the capacity to understand or feel what another being is experiencing from within that person's frame of reference. So again, walking in someone else's shoes. But the distinction is, at the same time, you are staying completely present to yourself as the person offering this gift of empathy. You're not getting sucked into the energy soup. You're not trying to fix. You're not feeling sorry for someone else. You are completely present and open, and you're really connecting with how that person views and experiences the world. And Daniel Goleman, in his work on emotional intelligence, really had some great definitions around empathy, and one is empathy is understanding the emotional makeup of people and treating people according to this emotional makeup. So how people react, it's less about needing that to change and more about working with them based on their emotional makeup and how they experience the world. Which in turn, as the coach, should make your life a lot easier because it will diminish the need for an agenda. That's the good news. So these definitions are just a chance for you to really get clear about what we mean by empathy and really start to practice getting even deeper with your ability to be with people, which is really what empathy allows. And again, as I mentioned, all definitions are from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary online, so if you want to check that out, you can. Thanks so much.